game story is so much more than writing.
I need you to help me, man.
Push forward into creating meaningful experiences that change our relationship with games.
What's coming out? The same original inspiration sitting around the fire.
This looks a bit more complicated.
The only platform that allows us to interact directly with the medium in
if you don't care about the character, nothing matters.
What this incredible medium can do.
We ask, who do you want to see speak at DICE? And 100% of the time, it's our opening keynote is in the top 2. And it's not hard to understand why. Yes, as co-founder and CEO of Epic Games, he's been responsible for giving us Unreal Engine, while at the same time blowing our minds with some of the most extreme experiments in video game storytelling we've ever seen. Through it all, he remains the guy who tells it like it is, and more importantly, what he thinks it should be. His tools are disruptive, his games are disruptive, his ideas? Let's find out. Please welcome to the stage, Tim Sweeney. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for coming. When I started at Epic Games in 1991, I had this sinking feeling that I was too late, that the leading developers and publishers had already been established and that I wouldn't really have a chance. And so it's been awesome to watch over the past 30 years this industry evolve from essentially a garage business into nearly $100 billion a year global industry that's a powerhouse. But throughout this time, we've seen a lot of precedents established in the game industry, a lot of them without much thought, and a lot of them just the result of random happenstance. They've become kind of established as the ground rules of the industry. I think we need to step back and take stock of them and recognize that some of the operating principles for the game business are wrong. And I'd like to go through it systematically and talk about what I see coming in the next decade of gaming and how I think we need to adjust our way of thinking about games and gaming ecosystems in order to achieve our maximum potential. So the next decade, I think we're going to see a continuing trend along the lines of gaming becoming a first-class social activity. Right? In the early days, gaming was solitary. You'd plug in a cartridge into your Atari, you'd play. It would be just you alone experiencing this thing. Now gaming is primarily a social experience. People more and more are deciding to get together with their friends, and then once they're together with their friends, they're deciding what to play. They're doing this in Discord or TikTok or other chat apps. In China, they're doing it on WeChat. In Korea, they're doing it on KakaoTalk. So we've seen kind of the Western world lagging in this regard. But I think more and more we're going to see people approach gaming as a social activity first and foremost, getting together with their friends and then deciding which games to play. And so this means that gaming is going to be as much a communication platform as an entertainment experience. We're also seeing gaming develop into an economy on its own. If you look at Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, you see games with really vibrant user-created content ecosystems. This began as modding in the early 1990s in the days of Quake and Wolfenstein and Unreal, but it's really evolving into something that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar industry in itself. And so we really need to start thinking about games not just as entertainment experiences, but as economies where other creators can participate and contribute and have their ideas heard. And finally, because gaming is such a social and mainstream phenomena, gaming is also becoming a platform for discourse. And when a streamer jumps in and shares a political message in the context of an e-sport, or just a streamer or commentator on Reddit expresses their opinion, we're seeing gaming become more like a social network, and whether we like it or not, we're going to have to accept that gaming is now a platform for world discourse. But most importantly, the whole game business is becoming the biggest creative and social marketplace in history. I think this means that as an industry, we're going to have special responsibilities that we need to consider really deeply. And so I've tried to come up with two sets of guiding principles. One is the guiding principles for consumers in the game business. I think the critical thing is that a gamer should be free to engage any game with all of their friends, wherever they want, without any unnecessary friction. And this is a big directional change compared to the kind of balkanized days when you had, some games on mobile, some very different games on PC, some different games on console. But we're seeing, like Fortnite and other games, more and more games are shipping everywhere and becoming pervasively available. And this will become even more so as we have streaming established as a platform where you can play a game on PC or console or mobile, or you can stream any game to any device from anywhere. Now, I'd also like to talk about a guiding principle for us, the suppliers in the game business. I think it's critically important to competition that we all be free to mix and match platforms and engines and online services however we want, free of lock-in and free of tying of different services to different platforms in a way which forces us to accept inefficient solutions. And the goal of all of this is to establish a level playing field where everybody can compete on equal terms and the best solutions can win. And the economic competition between us all keeps us honest and keeps the entire supply chain fair for everybody. Now, in this world, gamers and creatives are really at the core. I think we have to recognize that platforms and stores and engines and all of the services supporting them are secondary, right? We're participants in the supply chain of game development. I think we have to recognize that undue power has accrued to many of the participants who are not at the core of the industry, but are suppliers and have used their position in control of a platform or a social outlet or other things to gain an undue and unfair share of revenues. And so I'll dig into that over time. But I wanted to start out with really the good news over the past few years in the game industry. And the good news is that all of the platforms have opened up and become fully interoperable. And this is an awesome thing. We saw, at the beginning of the last decade, every platform had its own online service. You couldn't communicate across all platforms. And very slowly, different platforms opened up. But Fortnite had the honor of being kind of a forcing function. It was a game that had gained such wide adoption among so many players on so many different devices that it had become a real problem that you couldn't play on your iPhone and connect to somebody on Xbox or PlayStation. And this was actually dividing up social groups, and creating fissures through actual, gaming communities and real-world social associations of players. And so, after a lot of discussions and a lot of wrangling, Microsoft and Sony and Nintendo came on board, and everybody agreed to allow full interoperability. And so now we're in a world where you can play Fortnite or Call of Duty or any of those games on any platform, connect with your friends on all platforms, voice chat with friends on those platforms, and create friends, a social graph that transcends platform boundaries. And this has been a truly wonderful thing. And if you look at the Fortnite couch experience, where you might have two players on a PlayStation playing split screen, and somebody sitting on an iPhone next to them, and somebody on an old laptop PC, all in the same game session together, it's really quite miraculous. And the numbers prove that this is the future of gaming. Just in Fortnite and our more recent efforts with the Epic Games Store, we've accrued 300 million users across all 7 platforms, and they've built more than 1.6 billion social connections, social connections among friends as you have on a traditional social network. So that's a good first step. But I think the next step here is to start connecting all of the ecosystems, because we still have the problem that your Xbox Live friends are only Xbox players, your PlayStation Network friends are only PlayStation players, your Steam friends are only PC players and only on Steam, and this creates a huge chasm for interoperability. And so I think, as everybody right now is cobbling together solutions, Epic has a solution, Activision has a solution, different companies each have their own solution, each creating their own separate friend system and separate social systems. They're still unconnected. I think there's a real chasm that needs to be filled here. And Epic's taken some steps to open up the social systems that we built for Fortnite as Epic Online Services and start making them available to developers. And some games like Dauntless have shipped using that. But this is all just patchwork and stopgap measures in advance of what really needs to happen next, which is connecting and federating all of these different systems together. And something similar happened in the really old days of the internet, when every university and big company had an email system that was just proprietary to themselves. Somebody introduced the @ into email addresses. So now I could be Tim at Epic and talk to Tim at Microsoft or Tim at Sony, and we'd have an unambiguous way of referring to people across ecosystems. And that involved everybody with their own proprietary system agreeing to connect to everybody else's system. And they used different software frameworks, but they agreed on protocols and connected stuff up. And this critically needs to happen in gaming. You see with Microsoft, their efforts to open up Xbox Live to platforms outside of Xbox has achieved some traction. Epic's efforts have achieved some traction, but ultimately we all need to get together and agree to connect up. And one of the biggest obstacles to doing this in the past has been this. I'm sorry, it's a mind virus. This idea that publishers should own the customer or have a monopoly on the customer relationship, through some form of login and e-commerce. And that's just a bad idea. It's the opposite of the principles that Epic has built Fortnite on. The funny thing about Epic's ecosystem is you can log into the Epic Games Store or into Fortnite with a Sony account, a Microsoft account, a Nintendo account, an Epic account, a Google account, a Facebook account, a VX account from the Russian social network, and we're opening it up to more and more. And I think what we all really want and should agree that we should accept is equal access to all customers in a world with billions of users participating. And we need to give up our attempts to each create our own private walled garden and private monopoly and agree to work together and recognize that we are all far better off if we connect our systems and grow our social graphs together than if we each try to do it on our own. And the numbers bear this out too. In Fortnite, a player who plays with friends at all spends twice as much time in the game and spends more money than a player who plays alone. And a player who plays on multiple devices or plays with friends across multiple devices is plays for twice as long as just the normally socially connected people. So cross-platform, cross-ecosystem is the future, and we need to do it all for our own good. And so that concludes my talk about the good news in the industry, and now I'd like to talk about the bad and the ugly. Right, when they invited me up here to give a talk at D.I.C.E. and have the freedom to say whatever I wanted, I was like, oh, like Ricky Gervais at the Golden Globes? And that panicked them. So I was like, oh, don't worry, there's nothing to worry about. My talk won't be at all funny. But I think if we try to identify the bad trend that's hurt the entire tech industry over the past decade, it's the advent of the customer adversarial business model. Right? Traditional businesses made a product, they set a price, they sold it to customers, and there was a lot of competition, and so the relationship between customers and businesses was largely a positive and collaborative one. The customer had every desire to buy the best product they could find, and every supplier had the strong incentive to provide the best product, and so the negotiation was just about price and terms. But otherwise, when they reached agreement on price, the customers and the suppliers always were working together for their mutual good. But what we've had now is a massive scale development of industries that are based on adversarial business models, businesses that profit from doing customers harm. And doing their supporting ecosystem harm, including companies like us. And Facebook and Google have been one of the leaders in this trend. They give you a service for free and then make you pay for it in a form of currency that's dearer than money. They make you pay for their service in loss of privacy and loss of freedom. And that model has really pervaded the industry to the point where it gives everybody, not only the user climate, but also the political climate, an incredibly negative view of the entire tech industry. And it does a lot of collateral damage to good companies like us. I think it's really critical that we all help the tech industry transition away from these customer adversarial business models to positive ones. And just the extent to which this pervades the industry has been really scary. The other one is the establishment of these platforms, and these closed platforms in particularly, as a means of extracting unfair monopoly profits. if you compare, let's compare two payments industries. Number one is the traditional payments industry, MasterCard, Visa, PayPal, all of these systems, and the other is the Apple, Google payment systems that are forced on us in mobile games. The payment industry has undergone enormous competition and efficiency improvement over time. You can process a Visa card transaction for 2.5% to 3.5%, depending on territory. And if you break it down into where that 2.5% goes, it's generally distributed among a dozen different suppliers who each provide some slice of the service of processing transactions, whether it's the bank that's doing the clearing, or the company that's billing the customer, or the company that's providing anti-fraud services. Generally, as a merchant, you can choose and mix and match companies and suppliers from each of these different segments, and each of them competes on, very vigorously to ensure you have the best rates. And despite all of that, the payment industry is very profitable. If you just look at their revenue, disregard the total amount that's paid for a transaction, and just look at their slice of the fee that they get. Many of these payment processing companies have 50% profit margins on their fee, and their fees are often 0.2% or something of the like, and so they make a 0.1% profit on processing massive volumes of transactions. And over the past 50 years of evolution of this industry, it's become incredibly efficient. Whereas the payment fees on iOS and Android are completely decoupled from any economic cost equation whatsoever. And everybody who operates a digital commerce ecosystem has a pretty good understanding of the costs. There's payment processing. The fees range from 2.5% to 6%, depending on territory and payment method. There's bandwidth involved, and CDNs, which charge 1% to 1.5%. There's anti-fraud. There's customer support. But in general, in Epic's efforts to operate the Epic Games Store at a 12% store fee, we can build a very profitable business around this, and generally the 30% business model is a result of Apple and Google marking up their actual payment processing operating costs by a factor of 5 or 6, and just pocketing that on their own. And this would not be a problem if every company had an equal opportunity to compete. What we really need in the entire gaming industry is payment processing freedom, the ability for publishers to process payments on any platform however they want, in order to choose the best solutions and let the best solutions win on a level playing field. And if we had that, then suddenly you'd see a migration of publishers away from these 30% fee payment processing methods to the 2.5% fee methods, and over time, competition would lead all of the platforms to improve. But the problem is they ban competition. Epic submitted a Fortnite to Google Play. First of all, Epic released Fortnite on Google Play, outside of Google Play, targeting Android through a web release. And we've had tens of millions of users come in that way, and it's been a successful launch. But we couldn't help but notice that software distributed outside of Google Play operates at an immense disadvantage to software distributed within Google Play. To get the application installed from a web page, instead of clicking an install button once, as on Google Play, you have to go through a really scary series of security dialogues and often rummage around in your phone and change settings just to get the application installed. And then every time an update needs to be installed, you have to go through another scary set of permission dialogues that seem almost written to scare people away from that. And so what we have in the case of Android is a fake open platform. A platform that's open in name, but it obstructs users from installing applications in such a devious way that it puts every other store at a tremendous disadvantage. And Apple's approach is different. Apple is honest about it. They say this is a closed platform. You can only distribute apps through us, and all transactions have to go through a 30% payment processing fee. And they justify that based on security reasons, but it's not really honest. The core of security on an operating system is two things. It's number one, the ability for the operating system kernel to implement permissions-based security, ensure that apps cannot do anything that users don't authorize them to do. Apple is the best in the world. They could open up their platform tomorrow and it would still remain perfectly secure. In fact, Apple does operate an open platform around iOS. They have this enterprise program in which any enterprise customer can install any app from their enterprise just by whitelisting their enterprise signing certificate. But the sole thing preventing that from being used for consumer apps is just a contract term that says you're not allowed to do that. I think the next step that has to happen with mobile platforms is, first of all, fully opening up so that every publisher who wants can launch their own store on the platform, and it operates technically within the operating system on equal terms to the platform's own store. And number two, even these stores, which have massive market share, the iOS App Store and Google Play, need to open up to support publisher-controlled payment services so that every payment processor, from Xsolla to MasterCard and Visa to PayPal, can each compete on an open playing field for payments. And just to see if that was possible, Epic submitted Fortnite to Google Play, went through a few revisions, and ultimately it was rejected solely on the basis that we supported payment outside of Google's payment ecosystem. And that's unfair, and that needs to change, and it will change. And I think we as an industry need to use all of our resources to ensure that all of these platforms are opened up to us as speedily as possible. So untying all of these services is really important. But another thing that really needs to happen over time is purchase portability. The huge amount of this unfair platform lock-in comes from the fact that you buy a game on one platform, and if you move to another platform from a different vendor, you no longer own the game. That digital purchase, which you thought you owned, is no longer yours because of the device you chose to buy it on. And we've already, thanks to really generous and successful efforts by Sony and Microsoft and Nintendo, free-to-play games like Fortnite now have purchase freedom across all platforms. You can buy a Fortnite item on iOS and use it on your PlayStation or Xbox, or you can buy it on your Nintendo Switch and use it on PlayStation, and that's really wonderful. But that needs to be elevated to the higher level of supporting purchases across stores. If Activision would like Call of Duty purchases to be portable between platforms, then you should be able to buy the game on Xbox and play it on PlayStation, and play it on iOS, and play it on any device that you choose to move to. I think this will make the whole gaming ecosystem more free and more friendly for users. And over time, as we see these platforms opened up, we're going to see really strong competition between stores and platforms and payment ecosystems and the dozens of different service providers who each provide supporting tools for game developers. You're talking about engine creators and online service operators, cloud services. Open and fair competition between everybody will lead to much more efficiency for the industry, meaning better revenue sharing terms for developers like us, and meaning better prices for consumers. And ultimately, this is about best serving consumers by creating a healthy playing field for everybody. I think we also have to take an honest look at publisher business models and the areas where some of our practices have become customer adversarial over time. And the really two particular areas that stand out are pay to win and loot boxes. Fortnite made a brief exploration of loot boxes when we launched the initial, before Fortnite Battle Royale, there's the Fortnite Save the World PvE campaign, in which we had a bunch of randomized loot box purchasing. But we had a lot of talks about that. Some people love that way of playing. A lot of people spend a lot of money, but some people get very disappointed. They want to buy a particular thing, and so they spend over and over to buy loot boxes, hoping to get that thing, and they don't get it, and they get increasingly frustrated and develop a really unhealthy relationship with the game, where they overspend and ultimately come away disappointed. I think we have to ask ourselves as an industry, what do we want to be when we grow up? Do we want to be like this, like Las Vegas, the city we're in right now, right? It's a city full of hotels, full of slot machines, and outside all the hotels there are these bikini babes trying to drag people in to get them to play the slot machines. Do we want to be this? Do we want to be Las Vegas, or do we want to be worldwide, highly respected, creators of entertainment products that customers can trust? I think we will see over time, out of necessity, more and more of the highly respectable publishers will move away from loot boxes. And I don't think this is going to be a dramatic sacrifice. The most recent experience Epic has had with this was with Rocket League. Psyonix, the developer of Rocket League, joined with Epic, and we had a big talk about all of the different ways that we plan to monetize games in the futures and the shared values we have. And ultimately, we decided together to eliminate loot boxes from Rocket League. And so the week that happened, there was this massive outcry on Reddit where the people who had been really engaged in the loot box economy and felt like they were kind of the Alan Greenspans of micromanaging loot box economics and trading economics. The communities behind these things are deep. They were outraged by it, and they hated us, and they said we were ruining the game. But you know, over time, people became happier with the game, and over Christmas, despite the game being many years old, it's at all-time peaks in terms of both engagement and monetization on a model that had been stripped completely of loot boxes and randomized purchasing. I think generally as a principle, when you're selling something, the customer has the right to know what they're buying, and we should adjust our products to do that. And we should be very reticent about creating any sort of entertainment experience where two humans competing have an outcome that's influenced by spending. It creates an unfair game with an unlevel playing field, and some games do it very well, almost deviously well. They tend to be whale-oriented, and they tend to not be mainstream. And so I would hope for the industry that these games with all of these customer adversarial practices get kind of boxed into this well-defined genre that's more Vegas than gaming, and that becomes recognized as a separate thing from the game industry itself. We're already seeing it being regulated in a lot of areas as, well, loot boxes are not gambling. They play on all of the mechanics of gambling except the ability to actually get money out in the end. And I think that whole market should be separated from the mainstream game industry ultimately, and we should adopt practices that we can really, in front of the general public and in front of shareholders, say that we're doing our best as a business to support our customers. The other really exciting trend is the opening up of games as participatory economies. We've seen this pioneered by Roblox, but also there's some work along the lines of this with Minecraft and other things, where creators are able to build more and more elaborate types of content themselves in the game and actually build businesses around it themselves. Fortnite is in the very early stages of trying to open up more as a platform for creation. But I think we need to really start thinking about games as a great growth opportunity for not just building an entertainment experience and selling it, but for building an entire economy in which all creators can participate. We already have some degree of this with streamers participating, earning a living from streaming games and promoting games. But we can go a lot further with creation tools built into games. And I think that where this is ultimately heading is towards more and more games becoming open platforms for creators to build and release their own stuff independent of the company's efforts themselves. Like, the Fortnite Marshmallow concert was a huge event that was widely attended. But we would like, in the future, any musician to be able to hold their own concert of that sort without having to coordinate with us, without having to do a deal, but just be able to do that. And I think that this is the beginning of a world that moves beyond kind of traditional advertising as a way of reaching customers. The Star Wars crossover in Fortnite, the Marvel crossover in Fortnite, these are awesome ways in which the two brands came together, the Fortnite brand and these partner brands, and delivered an amazing new entertainment experience to customers for free, and raised awareness of everybody's products. And these were not advertisements, and they were far more engaging and exciting than ads. And I think the future of the game industry is going to see a lot more of that and a lot less of the traditional display advertising, where you're taking somebody's time away from the thing they're doing and annoying them by putting some unwanted piece of content in front of them in hopes that they'll take an action. That's obsolete. The future of this is you have an awesome new product you want consumers to know about, you start releasing free stuff in games that customers can experience and enjoy it. And this is happening on a larger and larger scale. 3 years ago, Epic worked closely with McLaren, the supercar company, to help visualize a car during its pre-production process before it was manufactured. So that resulted in the production of a successful McLaren supercar, but then that car just dropped into Rocket League. They took the billion polygon photorealistic model that had been built for this industrial visualization effort and put it in a game. I think more and more the convergence of real-time graphics is going to, in all of these industries is going to enable awesome crossover opportunities for all games. Now finally, I'd like to talk about gaming as a platform for discourse. Since the very beginning of all forms of media, These creative works have been a venue for the creators to share their views on politics through telling stories. If you think back to Kill a Mockingbird and the impact that had on people's views in the time, I think that's a genuine outlet for games that really make people think about things. I think this is an important aspect of the game industry. I think we need to separate the creatives' commentary from, and engagement with political themes from the marketing departments, and we should get the marketing departments out of politics. And the world is really screwed up right now. Right now, your political orientation determines which fast food chicken restaurant you go to, and that's really dumb. There's no reason to drag divisive topics like that into gaming at all. And it gets to the heart of what a company is, right? A company is a group of people who get together to accomplish a mission that is larger than what any one person can do. And a company's mission it's a holy thing to it, right? Epic's mission is to build great technology and great games. And we can count on every employee at Epic. We can even demand that every employee at Epic unite behind that mission. But in every other matter, we have to respect their personal opinions, and that they may differ from managements or each other's or whatever. And we need to create a very clear separation between church and state, where our businesses are operating as neutral venues for entertainment. Employees, customers, everybody else can hold their own views and not be judged by us for that. I think we're seeing a lot of controversy around political censorship of social media, pressure from foreign countries on domestic companies about discourse. I think to get through that, we as companies need to divorce ourselves from politics and say that that is for individuals to engage in, and that we as platforms should be neutral. And when we're making decisions about content moderation, what we should allow in our communities and what we should not allow, we should have very clearly established rules and treat the decision function on that almost as a judicial branch of the company, as opposed to making a lot of ad hoc decisions based on convenience. So to summarize the hopes for 2020, we want to see all platforms connected, not just technically as you see in Fortnite, but all of these social ecosystems around all of the different gaming platforms connected, so that an Xbox Live user can be playing any game and have friends on PlayStation Network and can play games across platforms, where each platform itself adopts some sort of open standards for this. We want open purchasing across platforms so that publishers can choose the most convenient and economical payment methods for everything. We want cross-platform payments, so if you buy one thing on one platform, the publisher can deem you own it on all platforms. We want to encourage customer-aligned business models in which we're all working together to sell great products to customers that they want, and in selling them those things, to have the only negotiation being about the price and the goods, and not about all of the ancillary tack on, drag along things like data usage and surveillance in our businesses. We want to foster games with creator economies, so that games not only become an outlet for the publishers to express their ideas, but for all of the users. And we need to respect gamer rights and freedoms. And so I think this is all part of what's going to happen over the course of 2020, which is the move away from a whole bunch of walled gardens into something that's increasingly open and comes to resemble, by the end of this decade, an open metaverse in which players get together with their friends, and they go from game experience to game experience, staying together as a group, as friends, and going across all platforms, and not really having to worry about what company made the device they're on, or what company is operating the servers they're playing on as they go through these experiences. And I think the path to this could be really smooth if everybody works together. But I also fear that there's an opportunity for this decade to be another lost decade. Remember Microsoft's lost decade, where they spent an entire 10 years under leadership that was trying to close Windows down and create an iOS-style ecosystem around it. Fortunately, those efforts all failed, but there's a real risk that in all of the platforms exerting their power and having a very short-sighted view about their interests and the interests of the overall industry, about being locked into another decade of platform wars. And I'm really hopeful that we can get through it, but we're all going to have to be steadfast in fighting for these things. The opening up of games and cross-platform play involved a lot of tough and painful conversations between parties. which ultimately result in great things for all gamers. And we need to be all prepared to have those unpleasant conversations as much as we need in order to achieve a good future. So that's my opinion. That's what I really think. Thank you very much for your time.
Welcome to the stage, Loaded Senior Vice President of Partnerships, Nick Allen, as he sits down with content creators Shroud and AnneMunition to explore their role in game making and the overall game development process. So please welcome them to the stage.
Hello. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Megan. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming and chatting with us today. My name is Nick Allen. I am the SVP of Partnerships for Loaded. For those of you who don't know, Loaded is a talent management and consulting company based in Los Angeles. Our mission ultimately is about connecting people with the games industry and organizations with the games industry, and a lot of what we do to make that happen is through the lens of content creators like Anne and Mike, aka Shroud. So again, really excited to be chatting with you today and talking to these folks too. Ultimately, want to give a perspective today of what these folks do and how that can help you guys in all the different ways as you create games, as you think about marketing games. These guys have a major role to play in that. So where I wanted to start was, Anne, with you talking a little bit about your journey to becoming a content creator. What was that like? And the steps that brought you to ultimately this chair of being a creator.
Okay, yeah, sure. Well, it all started many, many years ago. I was 7 years old. No, I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But I started playing games when I was little, and like everyone, grew up on playing video games. And I went to school, didn't have time anymore, got a full-time job. I was working as a designer, a graphic designer, at actually a game studio, a small one. And I started watching streams in my free time, and I was like, this seems fun, I'm gonna try it and see if I like it, and it took off from there. I thought, okay, well, maybe I'm kind of good at this, and I've been doing that for about 6 years now, full time, so.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Mike, yeah, Shroud,
sounds like me a little bit, I've been gaming since I was a baby. Like, my dad would throw me on his lap before I could even walk, and he just put the mouse and keyboard in front of me, and he's like, go. Obviously I didn't know what the heck I was doing, but yeah, and then when I was 16 or 17, I was just watching streams just like Anne, and that's kind of how everyone gets into it a little bit. You watch somebody and you're like, oh, I think I could do this. This is kind of cool. But you have no intention of it being a job. It just kind of happens, So I just started streaming when I got the internet finally. I had to persuade my mom for the longest time. I was like, please. We got the internet, started playing, became a pro first, and then once I became a pro, then everything just started to take off,
Yeah. And I think, Shroud, around that, it seems like a lot of your audience and your community has been following that journey for you from being a pro, competing professionally, being an athlete, into this content creation, era for you. What is your community like? What are they made up of? Who are your fans? Well,
I'd like to think I know them pretty well. Yeah. I hope. And I think that they strive to watch me be really, really good at one game, or to see if I can be good at another game, right? So a good example is Apex Legends. The second Apex Ranked came out, everybody was spamming me will you play Ranked? Will you play Ranked? So they just want to see how far I can go, or maybe hopefully I'll fail. That's what they're going for. That's what they want to see. That's what they want to see. So they'll play Dark Souls, they want to watch me suck, Yeah,
right. That's awesome. And yeah, and same question to you. I know you play a lot of Siege, a lot of competitive games, and a lot of other things too, but what is your community centered around in regards to you? What are they looking for when they are watching your content?
Well, people always ask me, what makes someone a good streamer, and I think that there's two big categories of streamers: those who are really, really good at what they play, whether it's a first-person shooter. If you guys don't know, Mike is pretty much every first-person shooter he touches, he's just the best at instantly, and it's kind of infuriating. Because I played 2,000 hours of Rainbow Six Siege, and he was better than me in 10 hours, and he's like, I don't know, I'm just doing everything, I'm killing everybody. And so there's the people who are really good at games, and then there's the people who are hopefully entertaining and funny. And I think that I am kind of good at some games, but mostly I try to just be entertaining, and I think that people hopefully watch because either they're laughing with me or at me, one of them. So.
Yeah, and I know historically game companies will approach you guys and say, hey, we have a new game coming out, or hey, we have new features of this game coming out, and we would love for you to play it, and you guys create some sort of partnership to make that happen. And a lot of the time, they're looking for your eyeballs, right? The folks that are centered around watching your content. But so much of your fans are a community around your content, your streams, and the things that you're doing. So when you are partnering with a game company, you are playing a game at launch or otherwise, like how does your community react? And Anne, starting with you, what does it mean for them to watch you jump into a game, and what does their support mean for game companies that are thinking about working with someone like you?
Well, I think that, your audience really wants to see you having a good time. I think that's, whether or not you're just the best at it instantly isn't really the main thing, but I think that they want to see if you're actually actively enjoying it and having a very good experience with the game. And especially those days when it's a game has just launched and you're streaming, and it's very different when you're streaming versus creating recorded content where you can cut out the parts that didn't go the way that you planned, so if there's a bug or, the servers crash because it's a huge multiplayer launch, they see all of that live. And so I think our job as a streamer is to not let those little roadblocks, create a bad environment for your audience, because you really want them to be having a good time like you are, and so you have to kind of, push through all of that.
Mm-hmm. And Shroud, same question.
To kind of expand on hers, that's really, really true. People will, of course, ride the hype of a new game, right? But to keep the hype, the person has to be enjoying their time. And since you're live 24/7, people can sense and tell that, okay, he's not really enjoying his time here, and they're not going to watch. They're not going to care about it, right? So, a good example is even let's say Tarkov. Escape from Tarkov is a game that's done really, really well from just all the drops and just so much exposure, right? And it has so many problems. There's so many server issues, and we're still just sitting here waiting, and we're spamming to get in, and that right there shows holy crap, this has to be pretty good. They're really enjoying their time,
Yeah. And so when game companies, when your community is engaging with you around this stuff, how much are you seeing your community dive into the game? I see a lot of streams that are the chat is giving advice, right? And obviously it has to come with an immense amount of gameplay themselves. How much are they engaging with the same content and the same games that you're playing too? And you have a big grin on your face.
Oh yeah, not always. I'm convinced that there's a lot of people who in their minds they're the best at the video game that you're playing, but in reality they've never touched it, But they think that they know. It's a lot easier when they're sitting, and they're watching you do things, and they say, well, you should have done that. I'm like, well, I would have done that if I had thought of it. But I mean, yeah, there's a lot of people who, what's nice about streaming and what's nice about the gaming community sometimes is that there's a lot of people that you can tap for help with learning new things, and especially games like Rainbow Six Siege and Escape from Tarkov, where, like you mentioned, they had the Twitch drops recently, which were in-game items you could get from watching Twitch streams. And so a lot of new people were jumping into that game to try and, they wanted to be a part of kind of the hype. And then they discovered, of course, some of them, that it was a game that they really did enjoy. But you have to kind of lean on the community, not only the viewers, but also the streamers who have a lot of hours in that game to learn, because Tarkov and other games are very not new player friendly.
Yeah, no, chat definitely knows all. They know everything. They're masterminds.
Yeah. Well, I would think with your, if so many of your viewers, Shroud, are watching to see what the penultimate play level can be in the game. I imagine you have a lot of folks that are watching you that are also striving to be the best, that are wanting to play at the highest level, and are likely very opinionated as a result of that. What is that experience like?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because I like to think that I know more than them, But then, I mean, they're honestly usually right, but it's sometimes you don't want to be wrong, You don't want to be wrong, so you see that and you're like, he's right. It's not that bad. I mean, I enjoy it. I've noticed that my viewership and stuff is based off of how many people are playing that game. You know, that's really, really how much I get my viewers from. That's just how it works, how it's always been for me. So like I try to, I guess, jump on like the hype train as much as possible, which I'm very fortunate for because it happens to be shooters. Shooters have been blowing up like crazy recently, and so yeah, I mean, it's not that bad.
Yeah. So knowing what your communities are looking for and why they watch you guys, what are the considerations that you're making when you're thinking about playing a game, right? You talked about the popularity of the game, but you obviously need to create content that your community is going to like, that they're following you for. So, and like when you're evaluating a title, when you're thinking about a game that's going to be launching soon or new features, how do you think about that through the lens of like, is my community going to like this?
Yeah, I think that is going to change streamer to streamer. For me personally, I try to only really do paid activations for games that I'm genuinely interested in, because like I was saying earlier, your audience can tell if you're not having a good time. You know, they're people who have watched me play video games at least for maybe 8 hours a day for like 5 years. Some of those people, you know, it's weird to think about it, but some of them know you better than even people that you know in real life because they watch you all the time. So they can tell when you're not having a good time with the game. And so if you choose to take an activation and you're like, well, sure, it's, you know, it's a lot of money and I'm just gonna play this game even if I'm not really interested in it, they can tell that you're not having a good time. And so for me, I always try and pick things that are really, that I'm genuinely interested in, or that I think that I could enjoy a lot, so that I know that I'm going to be giving my audience the best experience.
Gotcha. And is that like just the raw mechanics and gameplay? Is it like how much of like the spectator experience, I guess, is sort of baked into that? Because obviously the game can be really fun, but maybe not the best viewing experience for whatever reason. Like, I guess, how do you balance those things?
Yeah, that's really important. I think there's a lot of games that are fun to play, but maybe not as fun to watch, and I think about that a lot when I play, or when I choose which games that I want to stream, because there's some games that I'm like, I would love to put just 1,000 hours into this game, but I know that my audience, specifically my audience, isn't going to enjoy it. Some audiences are more tailored to that sort of thing. You know, there's some streamers who play one game, and so their audience is like, okay, I know that I can go to this person for this game all the time. But sometimes, you know, there's the problem with burnout with streamers, where I will just say, you know, screw it, I'm going to play something that seems fun, even if I don't think I'm going to have anyone watching. I did that one time a few years ago, actually, that I was just diehard into Overwatch, and I was getting really burnt out because I was doing it 8 hours a day, you know, only Overwatch and nothing else. And there was one day where I was like, I'm just gonna play Burnout Paradise because it's fun. I'm just gonna drive around and crash some cars, you know? And I actually had more viewers playing Burnout than I did when I was playing Overwatch, which was like huge at the time. It was in, you know, right when the game came out. But because I was like really having fun, my audience was like, oh, cool, like this is, you know, this is better than watching her just like rage at all of her, you know, other DPS players and stuff.
Yeah, no, that's definitely how it works even for me. Like, it doesn't matter how boring the game is. If you are truly having a good time, you're going to be more engaging. People are going to, weirdly enough, they'll see it in your eyes, you know, if you have a good enough camera. So they can see it in your eyes. Like, oh, look at that sparkle. He's having a great time, you know? And it'll hype them up. It's weird, but it's how it works. So they can tell, like, even if, like she was saying, like someone slaps a bunch of money on a game, not only will they notice that you're like not enjoying the game, they also are not going to care about the game at all. They're going to like think less of it because these people came in and they threw a lot of this, you know, money around, and clearly nobody's enjoying it.
Yeah. And it's cyclical too, because when you're having a good time and your audience is responding well to it, then you are like, their hype is building your hype, you know? But like when you're having maybe like an average time and your chat is just like, this sucks, I hate this, you're bad, then, you know, it just takes,
it just goes like, really negative.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you guys having fun, you guys having a positive experience will translate to your fans. And you guys have both have had opportunities to work with game companies very early in the development process of games, help to provide feedback, provide overviews of where they can take the game. And a little bit on your experience, I think, you know, I would guess that you having an early role in game development helps shape the game, be more fun, be a better experience for you and fans. So what has that been like for you? I know you've worked with a couple folks, but curious, what that experience is like.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, one of my main games is Rainbow Six Siege, and that game has been out for like 4 or 5 years now. So I kind of came into the game a little bit after it had reached its hype. I actually was sponsored. The first time I ever played the game, I was sponsored to play, and I've played maybe like 2,000 or 3,000 hours since then because I just got really like tied into it in the community. But Ubisoft did start bringing me in for kind of like feedback sessions and saying, how can we make this experience better for you? And I feel like there's a lot of things that developers need to consider when you have a game. Like, streamers are a small percentage of it, but we're a very visible percentage of the people playing that game, where we have, sometimes 10,000, 20,000 people watching you, play this game. And if you're not having a good experience because people are actively trying to make your game experience bad by like stream sniping you or like finding you in the game and like griefing you and stuff like that, then like we're not going to have a good time playing that game, and we're going to maybe try and move on to something else where we feel like the developers have put in certain features that can kind of protect us in a way. And I know that there's not really a solution to people doing that other than for us to just like not stream. Which is obviously not a good solution. So but there's certain things like some games that will just like put your IP address in the game, or like they put the server name in the corner or something like that makes it easier for people to kind of like track you down. And because we're someone who has like a bit of fame and they want to kind of be a part of that, or to like show off and say like they want to see their name on the stream and they want to like take a clip of it and like show all their friends,
Yeah.
So it's like there needs to be more thinking about how to kind of protect streamers. I feel like a baby saying that. Like, please protect us.
I was about to say like the same thing. Every time like us as streamers mention that to game devs or maybe even just viewers, everyone's like, okay, don't support like the 1%. And I'm like, why not? Like, we have all these people watching us. Yeah. Why not give us a tiny little feature? Like, yeah, it's only gonna affect the 1%. We're the only people who are gonna use it, but we have all these people watching, and these people are purposely trying to ruin our experience. And game devs do that. They have like little codes of the server in the bottom, and it's for bugs and stuff to report it easier. So I get it, but like there's always got to be, in my opinion, there's always got to be a streamer mode. Yeah,
and Shroud, you've also done a bunch of consulting for different game companies. They brought you in different phases of development. So aside from some of these like sort of viewer-related tools, what are some of those other aspects of that experience? Like, what other feedback are you in a position to provide uniquely? I think you play a ton of games. You think about it from a different perspective. So I'm curious the value that you see being able to add when you're brought in early into that cycle.
Well, I mean, it's already public knowledge that I played Apex, and I played Apex really, really early, and I was in like the test development there, and that was really cool. It was the first time I ever worked directly with developers. I was working with Respawn, and it was 1 year before it came out, and we were, it was good. There was an 8-hour session. It was 2 hours of playing, like an hour of like talking and surveys and stuff. And everything was great. The only thing that I've noticed from going to different like consulting sessions with game developers is you never know what impact you have, because they never tell you if this is something they can do. Like, let's say we want to make a change and we're like, hey, this would be really good. And then they just go, and then they write it down. But to them, they might just be like, they're writing it down, but they know they can't actually do anything about it. Like, maybe the engine doesn't allow it. I don't know that. I'd like to know that. So like the only downside is no game dev has ever told me what my feedback did, if it was good, if it was bad, if it was even possible. So that's like the only critique I'd have,
Yeah. And so have you guys, either of you, provided or like what is an example of feedback that you've provided that's manifested in some way? Like in the Rainbow Six on Siege, is there balance? Is there like things in game? What are things, at least at a high level, that you have contributed to that you ultimately see the result of in game?
I would say the easiest one, I guess, is balance, because like right off the get-go, you grab a bunch of people and you can easily tell like, okay, this does way too much damage. Yeah. That's probably like the easiest one to change. And I feel like out of all the things that I know might have changed when Apex went live is balance, because stuff was all over the place. So I do know that the people in that room affected that. But yeah, I can't really think of anything else.
That's helpful, yeah.
I know that for me with Rainbow Six, it's like a 5v5 tactical shooter, for those unfamiliar, and you used to not be able to individually mute the voice of one person in the game on your team, and you used to not be able to individually mute the text chat of each person. And as someone who has dealt with her fair share of toxicity, I told Ubisoft, please give us these options. And thank God they did, so you're welcome.
So yeah, on balance and then some features, I guess what would be your guys' ideal relationship with a game developer, right? Like what are the touch points that you would like to have, both being able to provide feedback, but them keeping you updated on how things are progressing? What is that, and Shroud, we can start with you, what does that model look like in your head?
Yeah, well, like in like a perfect world scenario, I think the best thing, obviously, when you first do a consulting, you usually go to their office and you're testing it all there, and it makes sense because they're trying to keep it private. But in an ideal world, in a perfect world, being able to have that same build that the developers have on your own PC, and just being able to have direct communication through, Discord chat or just anything, email, that would be huge. Because imagine how much more we can help instead of just one 8-hour session. We can just sit there and we can just play whenever we want. We have the build right there. We did that. I think I did that with Apex, but it was way late. Like the game was already coming out, and they gave me like a quick little build, and they're like, "Yeah, sign on at like 6 p.m. and you could just play with the people in the office." And I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." The game was already launching, so I couldn't really give much feedback, but it was kind of cool that they did that. So it is there. You can do it. So I'd like to see that personally.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. I think a lot of times when I play against the developers at Ubisoft, it becomes quickly apparent to me that they work on the game a lot, but the skill level that it requires to get to from someone who just works on games and plays them kind of casually to someone of Shroud's level, you need to have the power users in there to show you really what the full capability of the game is, because he's like, well, some guns do too much damage, and they're like, yeah, but we only hit 1 or 2 shots, and he's like, no, I hit 32 shots in a row, so of course it's going to do more damage, and they have to be able to scale that based on all the different types of players. So
yeah,
when you said to have a build in your home, I was like, all these developers are just like,
yeah,
you're not taking the build.
I was saying in a perfect world,
Yeah, but that'd be cool to have like you're saying 2 days before the game is going to come out or something like that.
So when you guys are brought in early to the process and get to provide feedback and learn about the game, and then that feature launches or that game launches, right? How does that change your experience around the title, versus something you've never played before or never been exposed to? Does it help from a skill perspective and diving in quicker and ramping up fast? I guess what are the benefits for you guys as content creators, for your audience? What are the benefits for them as well, being part of this process early on?
I would say the only real benefit for my audience when they know that I've worked on something, usually you're signed under NDA and stuff, so you can't talk about it, but when you can, I think they just feel better about the game, that you had some sort of impact. Even though they might not know the direct impact, they know that you worked with it, and that alone is pretty cool to them, But besides that, I don't know. I think that's it. We don't get much of a gameplay advantage, even though it might look like it, because you play the game a year before it comes out, but usually you forget. You only get 1 session, right? So yeah, the only time that ever gets affected is I've seen game developers that are trying to build an esport, and I'm big into esports, right? And they're trying to build an esport, and they're giving these new updates, and they're bringing in people from esports, but not everybody. They're just grabbing a couple pro teams here and there, and that's not really fair, because if they're trying to shift the meta, and the pros are there to try to help that, well, those 30 professional players just got an advantage, and they're going to keep those secrets, and they're going to be practicing with the guns that aren't in the meta currently, but they're getting ready for the meta, So that's the only time it's a little unfair,
Gotcha.
Well, like you said even a little bit ago, when we do these like feedback sessions and the devs just kind of write stuff down and they don't tell you what's actionable and what's not, and like I understand that sometimes that's not possible, but people really just like to feel like they're being heard.
Yeah.
And that's the same with people who are watching our streams, where it's like, if you say, I went to try out this game and I gave this feedback to the devs and now it's in the game, hopefully that's a positive thing. You know, it terrifies me to think that I would give the wrong feedback and then, you know, some dev is just gonna be like, all right, you know, AnneMunition said it, let's put it in the game, ship it, we're done, you know, and then everyone's like, we hate this feature. I would feel bad, but they like to feel like the devs aren't over here and the gamers are over here. You know, they want to see that there is, and I know that like a lot of devs are also gamers, but you know, people that are just on the internet, on Twitter, just like raging at devs, like they don't really think about that. So when you have Shroud or Ninja or Dr. Disrespect say like, I had a hand in how this game was made, I think that changes people's perspective a lot on devs wanting, you know, bringing in actual people that they respect, rather than just, you know, the faceless devs of the communities.
So in an ideal world, Shroud, like how would you want to be? I mean, we talked a little bit about you having a dream of wanting to make a game and wanting to be deep into that process and helping along the way. So like in an ideal world, given unlimited amount of time, obviously you have a lucrative streaming business, but like how would you want to be involved in the game development process?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's like the end dream, you know. Like obviously, I want to stream, I want to game forever till I drop, you know, because I love gaming, right? But at some point there, I do want to take a break, and I want to try to find a way to truly. I have ideas bouncing in my head all day. I'm just sitting on the couch. I'm watching Parks and Rec. I'm not even thinking about Parks and Rec. I'm thinking about a game. It's bouncing around in my head, you know. So like, I don't know how to get into that exactly, because obviously I don't have experience, right? I don't have any coding experience, programming. I don't know any of that. So I struggle to find a way in without having that experience. So I think one of these days I'm gonna have to, I don't know, do some online courses or something, you know, get a little bit of knowledge and then try to sneak my way into some game developer.
Yeah. And would you, like, is your ideal situation helping to design game systems and like, you know, like the look and the feel, like what are the things that get you excited as someone who's played so many titles?
I mean, for me, I guess I don't want to dictate and control the whole game because that's a little too much pressure. But I do really, really focus on like mechanics and movement and then gunplay because I love, you know, shooters. So like just to be able to give my feedback in these consulting sessions like Apex, that alone was like the first thing I did, and that was freaking awesome, you know? Like I just want to do more of that and eventually, you know, work much closer. The problem is I don't get to work closer with like Apex, you know, it was one 8-hour session and then like 6 months later it was another 8-hour session, right? Like I want to be there and I want to be, you know, watching this build develop into something, you know? I don't get to have that, so that's kind of like the goal, you know?
Yeah. And Anne, same question to you. I'm curious. And you also have a graphic design background, so I don't know if that's an additional piece to this. But like, if you could get more deeply involved, like, yeah, what would that look like in an ideal world?
I don't know. I honestly don't. You know, I feel like I started streaming and it was just kind of surprise after surprise, where it was like, oh, I can quit my job and stream video games. Cool. Like, okay. Oh, you want me to meet Tony Hawk? Okay, cool. Weird. For playing video games. This is strange. You know, I'm going to the White House. Weird. Just like, you know, sorry, mini flexes. But it was, you know, none of this was planned for me. So it wasn't like I was like, okay, in 5 years I will be doing this, and in 10 years I will be streaming, and in 15 years I'll be making my own video game, you know? And maybe that's, you know, not smart of me to not really have like a 5-year, 10-year plan or whatever. But I think I'm just kind of going with the flow for now. My secret dream is that it would be really cool, I think, to get into voice acting.
Oh, cool.
A lot of my heroes in video games are the voice actors. Awesome. And I don't know, I think like Mike's end goal is to, like you said, that was your end game, right?
Yeah.
My end game is like deleting AnneMunition from the internet and just like retiring to a villa where no one knows where I am, you know, and like no one knows who I am. I don't have to respond to people on Twitter anymore, you know. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, awesome. You know, you guys touch, as content creators, there are a multitude of platforms that you guys touch, streaming on Mixer, Twitch, other platforms. How does that like content ecosystem? How should game companies be thinking about that when like working with you, but more broadly, right? You have the emergence of TikTok, and you have Instagram, and all these other things. Like, how do you guys think about that entire sort of universe of content, and how should game companies be thinking about that in the context of working with you? Anne, could start with you.
Oh gosh, start with Mike.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sitting here. I'm like, oh, thank God. First. How am I going to answer this question?
Well, I'll change up the question. Like, how does Twitter and Instagram and other platforms help to like sort of feed into like the live streaming businesses that you guys have?
I mean, Twitter and like Instagram and stuff helps with your stream as a whole, because like you can post stories, you can post just regular posts about like different clips that you may have. How does it help like people trying to like sponsor you? I'm not sure. Usually like when game developers reach out, they mainly focus on like stream, and then maybe like one YouTube video or maybe a clip. I guess as a whole, as a content creator, you want to have everything. You want to be working on your Instagram, you want to be working on your Twitter, your YouTube. You want to be doing all those things, because sometimes they do want more. Sometimes they just want a 2-hour stream. Sometimes they want a 2-hour stream plus video plus Instagram. The list goes on, right? The bigger reach you have, the better. So.
Yeah, it's not like you can just do like, okay, over here's my Twitch and my Twitter and my Instagram are over here. You have to kind of build everything up all at once, which is kind of overwhelming when like every other week it feels like there's another, hey, we're the new Vine, and now there's 6-second videos. Everyone loves that, and it's just kind of, it's too much sometimes for me, I feel like. But you really have to work on all of it together and like raise everything up. And of course, like different audiences are on each thing. Like there's some people who just like, they only follow you on one platform, and there's people who will come to my stream and they're like, this is my first time being in your stream. I've been, following you on Instagram for 2 years or something like that. So I think really for us, it's more trying to like push those people to go to all the other platforms as well, rather than just staying on one. But as far as how that's like, for game developers to work with the streamers, I'm not sure. That's more of like a marketing thing.
Yeah, and I think there is a heavy emphasis from game companies on these social media platforms. But like, as you guys think about those social platforms, and then you think about the live streaming platforms, like how much more valuable to game companies do you think live streaming is than these other areas, right? Or I guess, how important should game companies be taking the live streaming platforms when they're thinking about game design, when they're thinking about marketing? How important are Mixer? How important is Twitch? How important are these platforms for getting the word out about their game in the modern era?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just important in comparison to like recorded content. Like we were talking about earlier, being live is very different, and they can visibly tell if this is something that you're enjoying, right? So that's like the beauty of sponsoring somebody that's live streaming, because I guess it could backfire, right? It could very well backfire for the game developer, because if the streamer isn't really having a great time, then it's going to show. But I think you gotta, you choose your people carefully, and a shooter comes out and you're like, oh, I think Shroud would like this, and then I end up liking it, and it's great. So like, it's just, you gotta hit the right content creators, but when you do, I think it's really, really impactful, because everything's just there, it's authentic, it's not recorded.
Yeah, there's no pre-recording or anything like that, and that's what I know is really scary, especially because we're kind of coming from this era of like broadcast TV, where like everything's delayed by 3 seconds or 6 seconds just in case, and we don't have that. We don't have anyone who's like sitting behind the curtain like with a button to just like cut everything before something goes wrong. So I understand that it is definitely scarier for people to invest in, but I think that the experience that we're providing to our audiences is a lot more authentic, because they can see everything in almost real time now. The delay has gotten pretty much non-existent. So it's like, and the fact that they're actively participating in what's going on too, it's not even just that like when you're watching TV, you can't say, to the character on TV, like, you should do this thing, how's your day, that kind of stuff. And so they're actively being a part of what's going on too. So the audience isn't, like, even the same as with YouTube videos, they're not actively participating in what's going on, and that's what's different with live streamed content, is that people can actually talk to us while we're in the middle of playing the game, and kind of, it's like being on the couch with the person playing the game rather than just watching a movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Apex is a really interesting example. We've referenced it a lot here. They had an influencer-first marketing approach, right? Like a game that no one had really heard about, no one knew much about, just gets dropped into the industry, into the ecosystem. Influencers take it and just propel this thing up. I guess, like, what they activated across a bunch of different people. It wasn't like a one-off thing, it was sustained. I guess for you guys, when you think about working with a game company, how important is like a broad reaching approach, right? Like you're getting to play with other people, you get this title, right? You're getting to like sort of feed the content from each other and like build a community around playing with each other. I guess in an ideal world, what does that look like, and for you, of like what is the ideal content creation that's like influencer-led look like? Is it other people? Is it multiple touch points where you're playing this game over the course of like a month? I guess what is the ideal situation if folks are looking to make a big creator-influencer play around a title?
I think that you can't, like, the audiences really like to see crossover between different streamers. If you've got Dr. Lupo over here and you've got, Shroud over here, and like you guys play together, especially in Tarkov now, but like before maybe you weren't playing together all the time. And when you put those two people together, those two audiences combined are like really hyped to see you guys interacting with each other and like laughing and making jokes and stuff, because normally they're just watching Mike or they're just watching Ben, and they're not watching them both at the same time. So people really, really get excited about crossover content between content creators. However, I don't think you can force it where you can put people together who are just like not gonna have fun and like not gonna be joking around and stuff. You really have to make it organic.
Yeah, like, cause in Apex, a prime example, when they were doing that big influencer push, they were matching us with other people. And I believe we did have a choice. I don't really care. I just want to frag. I just want to play the game. I don't care who I'm with. I just want to play it. So I think that just said, just match me up, whatever. But I'm pretty sure when they did that influencer push, it was because Apex is threes, trios. And I think I was with Dizzy and some other pro players. So it worked out great, right? But yeah, that's kind of how that worked there.
Yeah. I know we're about out of time. I guess I had one last thing I wanted to ask you guys, which is, how valuable do you guys perceive yourselves in the modern like gaming industry? I guess like you guys have enormous audiences. You play a very vital role around awareness of a title. I guess like versus 3, 4, 5 years ago, and you guys have been doing this a long time, like how has the influencer grown, and what sort of impact do you guys feel like you have today on helping games be successful?
I mean, it's a difficult question because it's hard to know how much impact you truly have, right? Yeah. It's kind of like the same question that we were talking about before with game developers. We don't know if we're truly making an impact at all. But I guess like the best example is once again reaching back to Escape from Tarkov. That's a game that was literally made off of content creation. Like they know it. The developers, they're from Russia and they're very, very open and active and they're talking to the community, and they 100% know that they've admitted it, they've said it, that the game is only where it is today because of content creation, because of streaming. And yeah, that game, it came out like 4 years ago in beta, and the only reason people know is because live streamers, YouTubers. So it's pretty important for sure.
Yeah. And how important is like, and I'm curious what you think too, but how important is like the type of, like the emergence of Battle Royale and some of these other types of games, like how important do you see that in like the influencer sort of reach? Have those games helped enable better content? And are there certain game modes, we've talked a little bit about content quality, but are there certain game modes and design that have helped influencers sort of rise up in today?
I mean, Battle Royales, when they blew up, they create a lot of content there because, it's your one life. You know, every game you treat as your one life, so you're giving it your all. And like sandbox type games offer that too, you know, like Grand Theft Auto, for example, where you can just, you know, ride a rocket ship to space probably now. I don't know, I haven't played in a while, but you could do some crazy stuff in that game. So, I mean, sandbox and like battle royale games, I'm waiting to see the next big genre. You know, I don't know what that's going to be yet, but having like that ability to create content is really important. I don't know how it's hard to think about that when you're like trying to develop a game. How do you develop a game for content? That's not usually your goal. Yeah. And usually your goal is to create, like, I would say most game developers focus on immersion, and I think that's a really good thing to create, you know, have that player really, really immersed in that game, and they lose track of time and they're sitting there forever, you know?
Yeah, I think that there's like not necessarily creating content creating games for content, but creating games that have longevity has been the thing where, like, I remember when we were playing Apex before it came out, and they were really like, we want to make a game that we're going to support for many years. You know, we don't want this to just be something you play and then you put down after like 10 hours.
Yeah,
you know?
Apex 2, you know, they want, like, that's a big focus right now for sure.
Yeah, so it's like things that, I mean, if I'm going to play 8 hours of video games a day, then like I need many games that are going to pull my focus for hours and hours and hours, and so that I can create content around that for a long time, because you do build audiences in specific games, even if you kind of hop around a little bit. When you're focused on like a genre specifically, where like you can play, you know, Apex and Call of Duty and Siege and CSGO and like all that, those different, they are different games, but they're all kind of in a same genre, and so your audience will still, like you said, they want to watch you, like, you know, be the best at that game. And so I think that like there need to be games that we can play for just forever. Like you could just sit down and play for 12 hours straight, you know?
Yeah, I think people are kind of over the phase of like, oh, what's coming out this year? And you know, the second one, the third one, the fourth one, 17th, you know? So like that's the big push. Like, how do we create a game and that we could support for a long time? Another good example is I played professionally in Counter-Strike, and skins and microtransactions have become so big in those games that I'm sure they want to make another one. But how do they make another one without ruining all of this money that people spent in this one game? So now they have to, you know, create something even harder, and now they got to transfer all of this stuff, and when they want to make another game, there's no way they're just going to ditch this game. People have invested thousands. The market there is crazy. So they got to like transfer everything over. That's another thing to, you know, think about. If you're making a game with longevity, usually you're going to have microtransactions to make you, you know, like Fortnite, to make you feel like this is my account, you know, but then that will create a problem down the road if you do plan to make a second one.
Yeah. I know I said last question before, but ultimately last question, where do you guys think live streaming is going? Like, you know, what, big existential question, but like what is the future of the industry that you see for yourselves and your careers?
Oh man. That's a tough one. I mean, live streaming has been so unpredictable. You know, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like I started doing this when I was like 17. I'm almost 26 now, and I just never expected to be in the position I am now. You know, so I really don't know what's going to happen. It's kind of like the same thing with esports. Esports kind of started as like, you know, your local city has random tournaments and you go there, and now there's, you know, like the LCS, this crazy league, and Overwatch League, and everything's, you know, turning into like a real sport. But I don't know where live streaming is going to go. It's so different. You know, it's very, very different. You can't follow the same path. Like esports can follow sports, but what can live stream follow? You know, It's tough. No idea. Truly no idea.
Yeah. There's an exciting aspect.
It's exciting for sure. Yeah, I don't know what's going to happen. It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say like more experiential live streaming. Like we started with kind of just, you know, like video games, and so like we stream like lots and lots and lots of video games, but actually streaming experiences. And there's been like a lot of IRL streamers that have come up where it's like traveling, and you can like kind of travel with them in a way, you know, by just watching the stream. Like I can't just take a week off of work and go to Tokyo, but I can watch this guy who is in Tokyo and is, you know, biking around and stuff. I think for streamers specifically, there's been more things where like in Rainbow Six Siege, there's like a little thing that hangs off of your weapon, you know, and stuff like that. And so I have one that's like my logo in the game. And so people who play that game and who watch me play that game are like, oh, cool, like I want that thing because it's tied to this person who I watch their content all the time. And I think stuff like that going into games, like Ninja just got his like Fortnite skin, you know, stuff like that is huge because there's so many people watching Ninja play Fortnite, and now they can like kind of feel like they're a part of that experience more, like tying themselves more into the game through these like little in-game items, like if there was like a Shroud, you know, gun skin, and there was one in PUBG, you know, and stuff like that where people can support you, support the game, and have something cool that's like a unique item. Stuff like that's huge. So I want to see more of that in video games.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I think one thing is for me is clear is that live streaming content creators, influencers like you will continue to have a major impact in the industry, helping to launch titles, helping to provide feedback, helping to get earlier into the process of game development. And I'm very excited to see where the industry goes from here. So thanks very much, guys, for talking with us, and thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Guys so much. Thanks to the Loaded crew, everybody. Thank you. Okay, so I don't know how many of you know me very well, but you might have heard that I love Star Wars. I love two things in my life, Animal Crossing and Star Wars, my happy places. So I could not be more excited to welcome to the stage today some people to talk about my beloved Star Wars. But these guys are going to be talking about specifically the creation and development of Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Please welcome to the stage the host of Star Wars Show and lover of terrible musicals, Anthony Carboni, and game director at Respawn, Stig Asmussen.
Calls out my taste in movies, doesn't put my chair where it goes. Okay, Megan. I'm properly attacked. Hi, Stig.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
It's great to be here. It's a total honor.
Yeah. You and I have been talking about this game
for over a year.
For over a year now.
Yeah.
Well, I'm pleased to tell you, Stig, the game did fine. Sold over 8 million copies.
More than that.
More. And then was the fastest selling digital release of any Star Wars game ever.
Yeah,
that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, we're at Respawn super happy with that, and just the reception from the fans. I think it's been such a roller coaster working on Star Wars. I didn't know that we all knew what we were getting into at first. It's just a really passionate fan base, and to kind of see them picking apart everything that we were doing along the way until we really revealed everything, and it was fair stuff to pick on.
Yeah.
And then just at the end, just kind of get this the fans just embrace the game the way they did. It's been awesome.
It's kind of like that with kind of all passionate fan communities, right? It's like they're watching as this thing is getting made, and they're like, are they going to do it? Are they going to do it? Are they going to do it?
Before.
Well, let's talk about how this got started. Like, how did you and Respawn get started and involved with making Fallen Order?
So it actually didn't start with Star Wars. I was been working at Sony. I'd been there for about 11 years, and over time I got to know Vince, that had a Respawn. Just at events like this, E3, we lived kind of in the same neighborhood or same area of LA, and we got to talking about starting in a new team. They were just getting done finishing up Titanfall 1. It looked like it was going to be a huge success. So it seemed like a good time for Respawn to start another project. He really wanted to do third-person action adventure, and I jumped at the chance and went there as the first person on a team that grew up to 140 people. For a while, we were maybe a handful of people, maybe up to 10. We worked on a vertical slice for this one title, but while we were doing that, EA was kind of having conversations with Respawn about interest in Star Wars, and something that Vince and I had talked about even before I started working there. And the stars kind of aligned, so to speak. They saw what we had been working on, and I think everybody looked at it and they're like, this team, which I think we were about a dozen at that time, seems to have what it takes to make a third-person action adventure game. And there was already the roots and the foundation of our combat system and our motion model in place. And we had an opportunity to move forward with this other game, but we also had an opportunity to work on Star Wars, like kind of shift gears. And we took that to the team. This isn't a decision I could make by myself. This isn't a decision that Vince could make. We had to talk to our small team at that point. And when the question was asked, what do you want to work on? Everybody gave thumbs up to Star Wars.
Yeah.
Some people were actually like 2 thumbs up, so that was awesome.
So once you decided that it was going to be that you were going to work on the Star Wars project and you didn't know what it was going to be yet, how did you sort of begin working alongside Lucasfilm and figuring out what this game was going to be?
So I think there was a period of time where the deal was kind of getting hashed out that we weren't able to contact Lucasfilm, but we knew we were working on Star Wars. I mean, signing up for a big game like this takes time.
Yeah.
And so for a period of time there, we just decided that we were going to become students of Star Wars. I mean, everybody thinks that they know a lot about Star Wars.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, and so we just started soaking in like a lot of the early Jedi games that came out in the late 2000s all the way up to the ones that came out like right before us, actually. We watched all the movies. We started diving into the animated series, but while we were doing that, we started thinking about, hey, what time period do we want to be in? What kind of game are we going to make? I think we knew that we should make a third-person action adventure game, but we thought it was, out of respect, it was fair to just kind of reset and think about some other things. And we actually talked about working on a pod racing game, which is not something, or like a star shooter, which is not something that this team was really built for at the time. And we settled back into kind of like the type of game that we were making before that has all the pillars that we find in what Jedi Fallen Order has become. And we made like a 1-page of what we wanted to do. And I finally, after 3 or 4 months of this, got a meeting with Lucasfilm, and it was just me. I went to Lucasfilm. It was pretty intimidating. I sat at a table, and there was 12 people I'd never met there before from this famous company. And we talked about, rather than saying, hey, this is what we want to do, because I didn't think that was a good way to start the conversation, we just talked in a very general sense of like, what are some things that we could do? Mm-hmm. And right away, we came to this, I kind of, I guess, steered the conversation of making a game about Jedi and Force user and having lightsabers, and the room got very cold. And which I couldn't understand why, but when I ended up learning is that, Jedi lore, it's essentially the holy grail for Lucasfilm, mm-hmm. and it's something that we had to earn. And they came back, and in that same discussion, they're like, you sure you want to do something with Jedi? And I said, well, I think that's what you guys are going to be most happy with. Yeah. And they said, you haven't thought about doing something like maybe like more of like a shooter? And I said, no, that's not what this team is built to do. So we kept on kind of going back and forth, and finally Lucasfilm was like, okay, make a game with lightsabers and force powers, but it can't be Jedi. Okay, what is it then? Force users. Fine, let's go with force users then. Uh-huh. And we did that we used that term for a while, but eventually, like you can see now, the game is called Jedi Fallen Order. So we kind of took us a long way to get there, but we finally did.
Well, and that's interesting, because something that people who aren't huge Star Wars fans might not know is that everything in Star Wars is on the unified timeline, right? Right. So just by saying, I want to do something with Jedi, you're immediately putting yourself into very narrow slices of the timeline, right? Yes. And so, because if you watch something, whether you're watching a movie or the Clone Wars series or reading a novel, all of those things are on the same timeline, and they all have to coexist, which has to be kind of like a kind of an interesting set of rules to work with when you're deciding who Cal's going to be and what this story is going to be.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason why we arrived at the timeline is not just because it was dark times and it was a good time to tell a story where the Jedi are being hunted, but also it was a good space for us to kind of add a lot of new stuff to Star Wars lore, like you're talking about. So it made us a little bit easier, made the whole process a little bit easier for us to come up with all these new ideas, and we didn't have to always stress test things against other stuff that were in development as well.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that you were talking about, the strengths of your team, but there are also things that people expect out of Star Wars. And so how did you kind of come up with the set of powers and the mechanics, the things that you wanted Cal to be able to do that were your team's strength, but also fit into Star Wars? Because initially when you hear, oh, Respawn's doing Star Wars, like things like the wall run, which the traversal is something you all do so well, but we've never seen a Jedi really do a wall run like that, and so how do you kind of make these things fit and feel like Star Wars, or how did that kind of discussion go?
It happened in a lot of different ways. Like I said early on, it was really important to us to make a melee action game. So lightsabers and force powers had to be a part of that. The good thing is we did a lot of focus testing, and I mean, I don't think it's any surprise the results, that those are some of the things that fans wanted the most out of Star Wars medium, period. So we knew we were on the right track there. We knew that it was important that we have an ensemble cast, and we had to figure out a way to kind of, I don't want to say check the boxes because it's not right. Star Wars has this thing that I just call Star Wars magic. That's really hard to describe. I don't really know what the recipe is to achieve it, other than through iteration. Sometimes you get to a point where something just feels right. And I think that through the development of our buddy droid, BD1, I think that's a great example of, like, we went through iteration, tried several different options in terms of the design and the animation and the way he sounds, and over time it was just like, this just feels right. And having a buddy droid in the game he's not a sidekick. I mean, he's truly a friend to Cal. That was from day one. I had a one page, and having a buddy droid, and they go on this adventure together was top of mind.
I love BD1.
So do I.
I love BD1 so much, but I love the whole crew. I mean, Grease is amazing, Seer is amazing, and these characters really feel like you're saying, that Star Wars magic, where it's like, oh, this is a Star Wars crew. Like, I feel like I know them. I feel like I want to see them keep going. I want to see other things that they do. What happens next, Yeah. And what's also kind of fun is, because they are on this timeline and they are part of canon, is you don't know where they're going to pop up next.
They could come in any shape or form. I mean, they could become comic books, toys, movies, and what an honor is that?
Yeah.
To be able to contribute, actually created some of these characters that for generations we might be seeing in other places. It's incredible. I don't even think I thought about it when I put down at the time, BD1's name was just kind of a placeholder name, and it's because we were working on Titanfall 2, which we had BT in it, and which is for Buddy Titan. Yeah. So I'm just like, well, let's just go with BD1. It sounds like Star Wars, and we'll come up with a different name later. And the fact that that's stuck, and it's now part of Star Wars, and it's how that influence happened is a pretty amazing story.
Yeah. How did it feel to go into a toy store and see Cal right next to all the other Star Wars characters?
It's hard to describe. Just when I first heard that we were going to start working on these characters as toys, part of me was like, well, let's not get carried away here. We still got to finish the game, and we got to make sure the game's good, because the run up to making those toys, I think it was almost a year before we shipped. But that tells you, there was a lot of confidence in what we were doing, and I don't think those decisions would have been made if people weren't feeling good about the game.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit more about sort of the mechanics and the things. As we've been talking over the last year, you've been using a lot of touchstone terms, sort of Metroidvania has come up multiple times. You and I talked a little bit about some classic Zelda, some Bloodborne, some Dark Souls, these sort of things that you kind of picked and chose some of your favorite things in these different genres and kind of melded them together, and it made something that's very unique for a Star Wars game, particularly in just, I think, difficulty curve was very interesting. I think people thought that this was maybe a little more difficult than they expected a Star Wars game to be, not in a bad way, But how did you kind of decide, was there ever any decision of like, oh, this has got to be for everyone that loves Star Wars? Do we have to pull back on some things?
So where do we
make
begin?
it more
Do you
accessible?
want me to talk about difficulty first? Okay, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
I think that very early on, we knew that we wanted to make a game about becoming a Jedi. You're not going to start the game and just go out and start kicking ass. Because you're growing from a Padawan into a Jedi Knight. We wanted that journey to be something that's very special and that the player feels every step of the way. So having an avatar that goes out and is learning with the player's learning with the avatar one-to-one was a touchstone for us, and that was kind of became our first pillar, which we called thoughtful combat. And it was more about kind of going into fights and understanding the abilities that you have, the collection of enemies, and how to turn their strengths into weaknesses, and vice versa. It proved to be, I mean, early on, because we like pretty tough games. I think you mentioned some of them. The game was pretty difficult, but we wanted to stick to our guns and make sure that we could, because I think you said Star Wars is just this huge audience, and we didn't really want to make anybody feel left out. So we relied on focus testing, bringing people out from the public, and just trying and playing our combat. Aside from the game, I think that's one of the first things that we focus tested. That was actual gameplay, was just kind of like what we call the combat gauntlet, where waves after waves of enemies came in. And we got feedback, and some people loved it the way it was, which is probably back then it was probably our second hardest difficulty, and what we ended up shipping on. Yeah. But through several different focus tests, we were able to hit a broader and broader audience, and it became clear to us that we had to, we started to get maybe, I guess what you would call less hardcore players, or more general audiences of Star Wars fans, and they definitely were feeling like the game was too punishing. So that's when we decided to recalibrate our difficulty levels, and we added story mode. And I think when I was able to, because one of the things I did over the course of development is I would always bring the game home and let my kids play it. And they're, I think over the course of the game, they went from 10 to 11 years old. And I could see a game that they weren't having that much fun with, but they really wanted to play. They really wanted to go on this adventure, and it was incredibly compelling to them. But there was just this extreme frustration level, and when your kid's chucking the controller, you know that you have to change something. So once we put story mode in, right away we were seeing differences in focus testing, and I could see the difference when I had my kids play the game as well.
One of the things that I really do love about it is above and beyond the difficulty levels, there is it's one of those games that rewards you for taking the time to figure out your powers. You don't necessarily need the deepest understanding of your powers to make it through things. Sure. You're gonna have a harder time, but it's really fun to watch as people get the idea of, okay, I'm gonna freeze this blaster bolt, I'm gonna pull this guy into the blaster bolt, I'm gonna throw the other guy. Seeing somebody figure out their powers is a really fun thing about the game for me. How long did that sort of take for you to figure out, and do you remember a moment where you saw it click?
No, it's not something, we knew from the very beginning that we wanted to have this synergy between the different powers, to allow the player to be able to chain different moves. And that went from different ways that we were treating the stamina in the game. We wanted to always make sure that different enemies, units kind of work together to kind of encourage the player to use certain powers. So yeah, that was always kind of part of the plan to begin with. I think one of the areas that it was great when we saw people that kind of made that discovery. One of the areas that we could have improved upon was communicating that to the player, because I feel that there still are people that are getting through the game and they're not really understanding that the depth is actually there. Which is, I mean, I guess it's okay because it's very accessible. You can just kind of one-off with a lot of these powers, but I feel like it really shines, and I start to have a lot more fun with it when I'm trying to project how I want to manipulate a fight with everything that's at my disposal.
Yeah, there's that bit towards the end where you're in a corridor in the Imperial base.
In the fortress, yeah.
Yeah, in the fortress, and I'm just like fighting my way through this corridor. And if you really understand your powers, it just turns into such a Hong Kong action movie in that hallway. And
yeah.
I just loved it.
And I wish we had more of that. I think that the designers on the game would agree that if the power curve came a little bit late on the game, and if we were able to have moments like that a little bit earlier, it just would have been better.
Yeah.
Because yeah, Fortress is just like it. I think people that got to that point really, you kind of have to understand like all the options that are available within combat.
Yeah. But there were a lot of other systems, a lot of other things going on in terms of as opposed to the combat too. Like bringing up the Metroidvania thing, like exploration is such a huge part of this game. And such a fun part of this game. The environments are absolutely beautiful. You're kind of using a mix of new environments that you all created, like Zepho, and places that are familiar to us, like Kashyyyk, like the Wookiee homeworld. How do you how do you and the team sort of think about conceptualizing places that we know and recognize and turning them into kind of these functional Metroidvania levels?
To be honest, our designers, we encourage them to kind of work, they'll have like a very loose understanding of where the location is. In some cases, we just work on some things that we call action blocks, which is just come up with cool moments, and they're not even something that's in the script. So we don't want to like bog the designers down with too much kind of narrative criteria, and so like I said, we encourage them to like come up with things that are outside of the box, and then later on we'll look at that and we'll try to figure out a way to make it earn the right to be in Star Wars. And in regards to our Metroidvania approach, we had 4 pillars in the game. The first one was thoughtful combat, the next one was agile exploration, and those kind of round out the fantasy of controlling a Jedi. And then we had what we called adaptive level design, which is first line under that is Metroidvania. And then the last one was Star Wars Awe, and that's how we add this magic to everything. And we always make sure that we're paying tribute to Star Wars every step of the way. And that means like when we create these designs, we have to, like I said, we have to make sure that they earn the right. But Metroidvania was exploration and combat for us it's almost like this tug of war, 50-50, like that's, and level designers are always challenging the combat designers are always challenging the level designers, and that elevates things. Yeah, sometimes game developers work on vertical slices that are like 10 minutes long to kind of understand what the main kind of motion and combat system is in a game and kind of sell the spectacle. And we decided to take a whole different route, and we thought it was really important that we really learn together what Metroidvania meant to our game. So we built the landing pad of Zepho all the way through to getting Force Push and going back to Zepho. And we actually had a moment in there as well early on where you met BD for the first time. So you got the buddy droid, and it was an hour and a half long. It was this huge vertical slice. But when we were done with it, like we all understood, okay, we know how we can project this. We know how this like expands out to an entire game, and we were able to illustrate that to people that weren't directly working on the project. This is the kind of game that we're making. Imagine this with more precincts on other planets, or on this planet, as well as other planets, and how they all kind of feed each other.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to kind of go back to Zepho and go back to other planets for the second time and just be like, oh, there's so many things I can do now. This is so rewarding.
Yeah.
Was there how did you sort of decide which planets, which environments you kind of wanted to include, and that sort of mix of old and new?
We knew we wanted to build a lightsaber, so it made a lot of sense to get a kyber crystal and go on that journey. I think that the origin tree and Kashyyyk was a big, and kind of like this idea of liberating the Wookiees early on, only to find out that you can't stop the Empire was a big theme that we wanted to carry through pretty much everywhere in the game. So that's kind of how we arrived on Kashyyyk. Dathomir was such it just felt like such a right fit because it has video game written all over it, essentially. I mean, it's kind of like being able to have zombies and things like that. I mean, a lot of it was just baked in there.
Yeah, sort of
Plus,
the entire
it's a really
culture over
interesting.
there,
It's a really interesting planet, like far different than anything else we were creating. The genesis of Zepho was and Bogano was more us coming up with an idea that made our Metroidvania design work, and this lore of having to travel to different planets and retraverse because you're following the clues of like this ancient race and how they kind of like left their mark on all these different planets. So that's kind of where Zepho was born. Braca, we just wanted to start the game off with a bang and have at least. I mean, we knew we were up against a lot in this game. We had to start a new team from scratch, working on a new engine, working on this biggest IP in the world, and there's expectations. And one of the things that I didn't think that we would really be able to pull off is having like real urban industrial areas in the game. As something that you're retraversing and going back to. So rather than putting us in a situation where we would fail, we decided just, hey, let's have that at the very beginning of the game and let the player go off on their adventure and make it very clear that this adventure is about more kind of this man versus wild relationship than.
And how, as you're kind of building all these things, figuring all these things out, sort of how are EA as a whole and kind of Lucasfilm as a whole kind of helping you out as you're making this thing?
Well, Lucasfilm is there to support us and make sure that the ideas that we're coming up with belong in Star Wars. I mean, we come up with some pretty crazy stuff, or it's not working against other things in the timeline. And in a lot of ways, they're educating us. Like I said, all of us think that we know a lot about Star Wars. Well, the reality is you don't really know shit once you start working on it. I mean, I've been on it for 4 years, and I feel like I'm just scratching the surface right now. There's so much there. So they were our mentors, our educators, and we became students. And and also to just not to say no to ideas, but more to try to help us figure out ways to make our ideas work. I think early on there was more of a struggle because maybe our ideas were so wild, or we hadn't developed the right tools on our end to communicate our ideas. So there was a little bit of a struggle there, and it took a while to get things pushed through. But once we kind of became more open-minded and a little bit more respectful, understanding that we needed to earn the Star Wars moments, and whether it's an item in the game, a creature, or a location, everything needs to be something that's stress tested. Once we realized that, the conversations started going a lot faster, and we've developed like what I think is a really special relationship with Lucasfilm. And I look back at it, I think it was a pleasure working on it.
I've had a lot of people on the creative side, whether it's the TV or movies or books, whatever, they've been like, oh, there have been times where like I was trying to figure out something in my story or something about my character or a setting, and I was like, I want something kind of like this, and the story group was like, that exists, don't worry, we've got you. Yeah. The planet you're looking for, the creature you're looking for, we've got it.
Yeah, and that's pretty commonplace. Now, sometimes that's not something that you want, and it won't fit the criteria of what the design is.
Yeah.
So then that's where the collaboration comes in. A lot of times that's where we would find hey, maybe this is a good time to make something new, like a new creature, because we couldn't find something that worked into that criteria. To answer your question about EA, there's just a tremendous amount of respect the company has for Respawn. So I would just say we just got 100% support. Nobody was getting in there. I mean, that's kind of the way Respawn works as well, too. Vince tries to run the company in a very ownership-oriented way. And so there was nobody at one point saying, hey, you have to change things and add this or remove that, or it was more kind of like, hey, how can we support you guys? How can we facilitate the relationship with Lucasfilm? Working with marketing was, was a great journey on this game. Yeah, it was. I think that, yeah, I thought it was great.
And then when the game came out, obviously reaction was overwhelmingly positive. How did you kind of feel as you started seeing all the reviews and the numbers start coming in?
I was blown away. When you're so close to something and you've worked on it for so long, I'd been working on that game since, well, I mean, I started at Respawn in 2014. It's the longest I ever worked on anything. Yeah, you're so close to it. We saw that the focus group scores were high, and we kept on tweaking things. But yeah, until it's out there in the wild, and you're getting the reaction from not only the critical reaction from journalists, but there was just an amazing response from players, and we could tell just by looking at following the numbers that people are buying this game like crazy too, and it's like word of mouth has become a huge part of kind of the success, and that's a testament to, I mean, I gotta believe some of that has to do with just Star Wars and this massive fan base.
Fans are really connecting to the characters too.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, look, man, I love Grease. Grease is dope. Grease is so dope. And all of my friends, we're very into Grease. But we're seeing a lot of love for all the characters. I mean, Cal, people are tweeting at me every day that Cal is their favorite Jedi. People are talking about Seer and the rest of the crew. Do you have a favorite character?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, I love them all. I love what they all became. I would say Seer is just because, just from the very beginning, when I was talking about that one pager, wanted to have a mentor in the game, and I wanted her to be somebody that, had kind of this dark past, was dealing with some demons, and that would question, kind of, the cause that she's fighting against, and her ability to train somebody, and Deborah Wilson came in, and she just completely understood that, yeah. And she evolved it in a way that I don't know that any of us really expected. And if you think about it too, the story of the game, in a lot of ways, is a story about Seer, and the struggles that she had to go to get to this point, and finding Cal, and yeah. Eventually succeeding in this mission towards redemption.
Yeah, it's a different mentor than we're used to seeing, yep. Too. I think, especially for a larger, more general Star Wars audience, we're used to the lone Jedi who's living off somewhere, right? And he's still a Jedi, still cool, just removing themselves from society. And this is a very different thing where it's no, I'm going to remove myself from being a Jedi so I can still be part of this. Yeah.
And she's very active. Yeah. She's not hiding. She's out looking for somebody to help her.
Yeah, it's an amazing story. I love the crew so much. Something a little more general here. Now that y'all have finished and everything has gone extremely well, what is next for the team? Is there anything next for Fallen Order? Is there a new game on the horizon from y'all?
I can't talk about what's next. What I will say, it's yeah, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, but we're still trying to sort out what our plans are.
Cool.
Thank you guys so much. We'll talk to you later. All right, you guys, we have one more talk before lunch. As leaders in the field of machine learning, I'm happy to invite to our stage today Google to talk about their approach to merging creativity with advancements in technology. Please welcome Creative Director of Google Stadia, Julian Cuny, and Vijay Sundaram, Group Product Manager at Google Research. Thank you.
When you think about the relationship between AI and games, you might think of something like this. AlphaGo beating Lee Sedol at Go. Or this, Watson beating reigning champions at Jeopardy. Or this, Deep Blue, beating Garry Kasparov at chess. In a sad sort of way, these moments seem to define the evolution of modern AI. Research has gotten really good at using games to advance AI techniques and beat the crap out of humans at their own games. We're trying to flip the relationship between AI and games, so it feels a bit more like this.
There is a growing number of people in our industry thinking about how to use AI and games. What we found out is that most of the work being done is focusing on increasing tool and pipeline efficiency. And this is great. We do think about that as well. But the question we keep asking ourselves is, what would not be possible without AI? Today, we have multiple projects going on between Google Research and Stadia. You can think of them as joint ventures. And while we're not ready yet to show you the specific progress of these joint ventures, we want to give you a window on how we think about those things and why we're excited. With the hope that maybe some of you, individuals, studios, or publishers, will want to join us in this adventure. Spoiler alert, and I'm not going to sugarcoat this, it's really hard. It's a new territory, it's full of traps and surprise, but it's also full of incredible opportunities. And if we go there together, we have a better chance at finding and delivering on these promises. But first, let us tell you more about this journey.
So it all started with a Google topic. Google has a grassroots culture where new projects live or die by getting your ideas into a doc, putting them out there, and finding one believer at a time.
And you know what I did, right? I swiped right. The opportunity was too good. I've decided to join Stadia because I was excited by the opportunity of connecting cloud gaming and YouTube together. And you will start seeing much more of that in 2020, by the way. But now, suddenly, we got the opportunity to bring Google Research into the mix. And with that came an entirely new world of possibilities. That being said, we quickly found out that we had to be mindful about how do we bring these worlds together.
When you're building new products based on research, you need to make bets that work 2, 3, 4 years into the future. But this turns out to be surprisingly hard. In a 6 to 18-month time frame, you really can't take that much risk. And so there's really a lot more about execution than research. At 5 to 10 years out, you can be ambitious and take big risks with a lot of margin for error. But it's this middle ground where ideas are so tricky to get right, where they're hard but not impossible. You have a lot of the accountability of the short term with a lot of the uncertainty of the long term.
And that middle ground that Vijay is talking about, we also call it the valley of despair. It's like when you have to build a new engine, you know it may take years before you go back to the production velocities that you had before, but you also know that if you want to leapfrog, this is the price that you have to pay. And full disclosure, this middle, scary part, this is exactly where we are right now. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the things we are working on. We are breaking this down in 3 building blocks: characters, worlds, and players. And because we only have 20 minutes today, we'll only highlight some key concepts in each one of these things. And to illustrate those things, we will use the work of many teams inside and outside of Google. And another disclaimer, and this one is very important, okay? We are not announcing any product today. We are not foreshadowing anything. Everything you're going to see is still very experimental.
Which is a polite way of saying you're about to see a whole lot of researcher art. So let's start with characters. One of the areas we're really excited about here is reinforcement learning. It's an approach for computers to learn what to do or how to act based on trial and error and feedback through rewards. For a gaming analogy, it's like dropping an unprogrammed NPC into a game and have it learn to figure out how to play based on mashing buttons and tracking its score. To make the analogy between these worlds a bit more explicit, in gaming, a player uses controls in a game that results in changes to game state, as well as scores that the player can then see. In reinforcement learning, an agent takes actions in an environment that result in changes in that environment, as well as rewards that the agent can observe. Now, researchers experiment and they tinker with different parts of the system. Designs for the agent and the environments, actions and observation spaces, reward functions, to train agents to do all kinds of things. And so you think this might be the kind of thing they're looking at all day long. But there's also a whole lot of this. What you're looking at are the results of reinforcement learning. Agents that have learned policies to maximize rewards in the specific environments and tasks they were trained on. Sometimes these agents amaze us. Here you see an agent that's learned to both kick a target and to do it in a very specific kick style that was shown to it. And it's learned to do those simultaneously and cope well even when researchers peg it with boxes and be mean to it. Some of these agents surprise us. Here, in a boat racing game, an agent controlling the boat figures out it can score higher scores just by looping in circles and re-hitting targets that are spawning, as opposed to competing in the race at all. Some of these agents just want a derp. Here, this humanoid was rewarded to learn how to walk on its 2 feet just by being rewarded to go as far and as fast as it can before falling over. This has nothing to do with reinforcement learning, but it felt right here. What comes up over and over again as we're going through these examples in our own experiences is that they're surprisingly entertaining, which got us thinking, why do researchers get to have all the fun? In maybe an overly romantic way, you could look at their work as a form of play and tinkering filled with joyful wins and surprises, epic fails at what these agents learn and do. It's just that this process is kind of intense and inaccessible to the rest of us. But what if we can make this same process fun and accessible without losing the magic of reinforcement learning? Players could define goals and rewards for agents, or show demonstrations to help them out, or give feedback through things like cheers and boos. We need these interactions to feel great for the player, not just work technically, but if we can pull it off, these could become new mechanics that give players a form of expressivity they haven't had before, through the form of character behaviors.
Okay, so at this point, you might be wondering why you should care. Well, because of YouTube, and something we all care about, which is discoverability. Every single day, 200 million people are showing up on YouTube to watch gaming content. And YouTube is also the #1 destination where people go when they need to decide if they are going to buy your game or not. So in other words, you want to make games that are highly watchable and highly shareable. And looking at the data, we've learned a few things. Let me share a couple of these things. First, player expression. Always a winner. It's going to help your game no matter how small or big. Second, there are 2 genres that are overperforming on YouTube: competitive game and sandbox game. Now we believe that reinforcement learning can help introduce fascinating new mechanics to both. Let's start with sandbox. When you think about games or platforms that are big on player expression and allow deep customization, if a user wants to create a new gameplay mode, for example, mechanics, what we're expecting from this user is download a set of tools, learn how to code, and then program. It's so much friction. Despite that, these platforms are incredibly powerful. Here, we have Roblox and Garry's Mod. Both are big success on YouTube. But we think that with reinforcement learning, we could greatly simplify that. Imagine jumping into a sandbox game and switch to some sort of God mode-like. And then just showing your agent what you expect from them, like capture the flag and bring it back here. The agents would directly learn from you with no need for additional code, animation, or whatnot. It would supercharge player expression and UGC like we've never seen before. We do have something like that already working in prototype. It's very promising. Now, the geek in me wonders what it means for the next generation of games like Dwarf Fortress or Factorio. You could teach and orchestrate swarm of agents that would learn from you or from whatever YouTube video you will feed them with. It's a complete new game design space that we can explore now. And what if we allow people to create and assemble their agent the same way people create and assemble battle bots in real life? Think about it. A fully physics simulated world in the cloud with perfect replication on all clients, no possibility for cheating. And then you had custom agent with non-deterministic behaviors. I'm not sure you can create an experience more systemic than that. So maybe there is a new generation of game coming down the pipe where you are a coach, coaching your agents. And if you keep the example of battle bots, you can imagine how you would pitch your agents in PvP battle. And as you can see, we started with sandbox game, and we're now sliding into competitive games, right? So now let's turn this idea upside down. You're not the coach. The AI is the coach, your personal coach. Tracking and analyzing your performance and giving you personal recommendation at the end of each game, maybe even creating custom offline games with bots designed specifically to help you improve. Deliberate practice applied to video game. It sounds dry, but we can easily spice things up. We are leaving the territory of reinforcement learning for a second, but as you know, the world of digital assistant is having tons of fun with celebrity voices. Well, let me tell you something. If I'm playing Battlefield and I can have an AI that acts as my personal coach, giving me contextual advices while I'm playing, I really want Arnold Schwarzenegger to be my coach. Like, get into the chopper, right? I mean, like, you can easily imagine how you start getting some type of very fun experience. But that's not all. This agent, this coach, would also be able to learn from other players, right? So if you are wondering what it feels like to play against your favorite esport player, provide your coach, your agent, enough YouTube video of a player in question, and you will know how it feels. It will feel like that. But that's okay, because when it comes to competitive game on the internet, a little bit of humility from time to time is probably a good thing. Okay, now let's talk about worlds. Our reality, our world, has always been a constant source of inspiration. But as you all know, these type of games are really expensive to make and scale. There are obviously some great procedural technique, but what you're gaining in scalability, you're losing in authenticity. But this may change in the future. And the best example of that is the new Flight Simulator by Microsoft. If you have not seen the trailer, you should. It's amazing. It is powered with Bing Maps, and it demonstrates that you can start to have both scale, Earth scale here, and authenticity, which in the concept of this game is very, very powerful. Obviously, being Google, we're lucky, because we have a geo team that has been active for a very long time. As a matter of fact, the Google Map team is in the middle of celebrating their 15th birthday. And you may have seen some of the delightful things that they have done over the years, such as Google Earth VR, or the API that enable you to bring real geodata in Unity, which in return greatly facilitate the creation of geolocated game. Now, today, we're currently exploring how to use the data that we have, which is constantly refreshed by the geo team with better sensors, captation from space to street level, and combine this with machine learning technique that could enable the creation of Earth-based or Earth-inspired games with a much higher production value than before. Maybe even infinite scale, and with on-demand level of authenticity. Sounds easy, no?
No, not easy. In fact, this is something we'd like for all of our problems in the world, but the reality is something like this is going to take a while to get. What we do know is we may not even want this for what we're talking about. Every game's going to need something slightly bit different for its design, for its art direction, and so on. And so we likely want something more like this. Taking inspiration from a lot of the great work that's already happening around procedural content generation. Now, one idea we're exploring is how a new machine learning building block, generative models, could help supercharge things. Think of a generative model as a function that can output newly generated examples that feel like part of the data set it was trained on. You can contrast this to other machine learning models that predict things like chances of rain or classify things like cat versus dog. The examples you see here were all generated by state-of-the-art generative models trained on large data sets of faces. Each year represents the state-of-the-art results for that year. Over just a few years, there's been rapid improvements to both the resolution and also the diversity of images these models can generate. So let's bring this back to artist tools and see how generative models could fit into the picture. What you see here is a demo from NVIDIA. On the left, a user sketches a layout for a landscape, and on the right, a generative model produces a photoreal rendering of that layout. Now, in this case, the generative model was trained on a data set of photorealistic landscapes, so it could produce a new one based on the user's input. Now, how can we optimize an approach like this for designing playable Earth worlds? Well, to start, we're tackling generative models on two fronts: 2D textures and 3D geometries. In both cases, we're looking at urban environments standing on the shoulders of our geo team's experience. For 2D textures, the kind of generative models we saw earlier are getting good enough for really narrow use cases. And so here you can see the very beginnings of experiments we're running to train a generative model on real facades from Street View on the left, so we can generate new facades in their same style on the right. If we can get this to a point where we can actually tie it together with artists that can then steer these models and then apply them to handmade geometries, we might have made a small dent in this problem. For 3D geometries, we're in much newer territory. It's early days for doing machine learning with 3D data in general, 3D data being things like meshes or point clouds. And pure generation is a lot further away. But we can still start to chip away at this. This is, again, very early work, but you can see how we've been able to extract 3D meshes of buildings, and just the buildings, not all the surrounding area, that we can then pull into other tools and workflows to allow for refining this with a combination of artist expertise and additional 3D machine learning techniques that we're trying to push on. Now, there's one more wildcard direction, which really blurs the distinctions that we've been making here between 2D textures and 3D geometries. And that's shown here as a demo of neural rendering. What you have here on the left is 3D point cloud data, raw 3D point cloud data. And on the right, 2D photoreal renders from that data directly, without an intermediate construction or 3D representation. Altogether, this is definitely some of the riskier technical work we're tackling, but we're really optimistic that some of these puzzle pieces could come together and take a step towards the Earth-scale games we're excited about having. So we just talked a little about worlds. To close, we want to talk about one of our favorite projects in the players bucket. And I've spent just enough time in gaming to know this slide's a career-limiting move for Julian. So I'm going to go ahead and take the hit for us and launch into it.
Okay. Joke aside, looking at this slide, I know some of you are maybe rolling their eyes, but we don't. We think these devices have brought millions of new people to gaming, and that's extremely valuable to our industry.
So the Kinect and the Wii are really inspirational for us, especially given what we're trying to do with this entire collaboration. They created the category of motion gaming. And even though it's been a decade, the core of what made these experiences so special really hasn't changed. Moving still feels really good. It's still good for you. And it's still fun to do together. And these things are just as likely to be true a decade from now as they are today. But here's what has changed in the last 10 years. Computer vision the ability for computers to understand content of digital images, like from an RGB camera, has gotten way better. You can see here how error rates on a standard recognition task have dropped to below 5% in just the last decade. Let me share a few more examples of work from Google that's particularly relevant here. We've gone from being able to tell if there's a person or not a person in a picture to now being able to detect skeletal structure, which pixels belong to which body part, for multiple people in a scene. We're starting to understand the activities that people might be doing in that scene. Here on the left, you see 4 different examples of a squat. Different lighting conditions, different camera angles. On the right, you see a visualization of how one vision model can understand all 4 of these motions are similar in their up and down motion. One simple use case for this is automatically counting reps. And again, without any accessories, just an RGB camera. Hands. We can now track hands and fingers at an incredible fidelity. And this sets us up to do higher level gesture understanding like sign language, which is actually a really nice example of how to open up new interactions and accessibility for players in games. And of course, there's been a lot of relevant work in AR to understand our physical space. Things like surfaces and depth, other objects. So virtual elements and physical elements can interact. Finally, computer vision models are steadily getting smaller and more efficient. The red line here shows a new architecture that needs much less compute than previous ones, but without sacrificing accuracy. And of course, we know consumer hardware keeps getting more and more powerful. So when you put those together, it means that a lot of these models we're talking about are increasingly able to run in real time, in constrained contexts, and on a larger fraction of devices that we already have.
I hope you understand now why we're so excited about computer vision. The models are already working extremely well, and the velocity at which the progress are being made is mind-blowing. So you get all the convenience of cloud gaming, and now to enable motion gaming, you don't need a new device. You can use the one you already have, being a laptop or a smartphone, as long as it has an RGB camera. But that's not all. You still want to combine this with YouTube. And I'm not talking about gaming content here, but music, dance, fitness. And OK, now I'm getting a little bit worried about reading some crazy headlines tonight. So as we're about to wrap up, this is now the perfect time to remind you what we told you earlier. Everything you saw today is R&D. And truth to be told, there are plenty of additional things we would have loved to talk about. The takeaway from this presentation is simple. We want to build a gaming platform for everyone. And to reach billions of people, we'll have no choice but to be bold and innovate by bringing the best of Google. But the true measure of success will be to get there together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, guys. Thank you. All right, well, that's it, everyone. Thank you to all of our speakers today, and thank you for coming.